She divorced her billionaire husband 2 years ago, but when he boarded the plane, he found her holding their secret twins. I thought I'd lost everything in the divorce 2.5 years ago, but when I looked across the airplane aisle and saw my ex-wife holding 2 toddlers who had my face, I realized I'd lost something far more devastating: children I never knew existed. Have you ever discovered a truth so shocking it made your entire world stop? A secret so big it rewrote your entire past? Because sitting in seat 3A of flight 847, staring at the woman who destroyed me and the twins who had my eyes, I was about to learn that betrayal has layers I never imagined. What she told me next would either give me everything I'd ever wanted or destroy me completely. Before we dive in, I want to thank every single one of you for helping us reach over 1,000 subscribers. You're the reason Mr. Steal Rich Stories exists. If this story grips you like it's gripping me, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And smash that subscribe button because this journey is just getting started. My name is Grant Mercer, and routine has become my religion after the divorce. Same flight route between Chicago and Denver, same seat 3A, same black coffee order, the same quarterly reports pulled up on my tablet before the plane even left the gate. Predictability was the only thing that kept the memories at bay. The memories of her. It was a Thursday morning, early enough that the sky still held traces of darkness. Business class was half empty, which was exactly how I preferred it. Fewer people meant fewer forced conversations, fewer fake smiles, fewer reminders that my perfectly tailored suit and first-class ticket couldn't fill the hollow space where my heart used to be. I was 3 pages into a report on third-quarter projections when I heard it. A flight attendant's voice, bright and helpful in that professional way they all mastered. "Ma'am, let me help you with those bags. You've got your hands full." Something in that moment pulled at me. Maybe it was the familiar sound of laughter that followed, musical and light, despite obvious exhaustion. Maybe it was the way the universe works when it wants to remind you that some chapters never truly close. Whatever cosmic force was at play, I looked up, and my world shattered. Callista Crowe stood in the aisle across from me, more beautiful than any photograph I'd kept hidden in my phone could capture. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, practical and unpretentious. She wore soft grey sweatpants and an oversized sweater, the kind of comfortable traveling clothes that prioritized function over fashion. It was so different from the designer outfits she'd worn during our marriage, the ones my mother had insisted she needed to fit into our world. But it wasn't the changes in her appearance that made my heart stop. It wasn't even seeing her after 2.5 years of silence, of unanswered calls and returned letters. It was what she held in her arms, who she held in her arms. 2 toddlers, one on each hip, their small bodies balanced with the ease of practiced motherhood. And their faces, God, their faces. The little girl had Callista's warm brown eyes, deep and expressive, but her hairline formed the distinctive widow's peak I saw in my own reflection every single morning. Her nose was delicate like her mother's, but her chin had the Mercer stubbornness written all over it. The boy possessed my sharp jawline in miniature, so perfectly replicated it was almost eerie. His eyes were lighter than his sister's, closer to my own grey-blue, and when he turned his head, I saw Callista's graceful neck in the way he moved. They couldn't have been more than 18 months old. They couldn't have been anyone else's children but ours. The tablet slipped from my hands. It clattered against the armrest, with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet cabin. Callista's head snapped toward the noise, and for the first time in 2 years, our eyes met. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. Her lips parted, and my name fell from them like it was being torn from somewhere deep inside her chest. Grant. It was prayer and curse, hope and fear, love and regret, all compressed into 2 syllables. I'd heard my name spoken a million different ways, by a million different people, but only Callista could make it sound like both hello and goodbye at the same time. The children sensed their mother's sudden tension immediately. The little girl buried her face in Callista's shoulder, her tiny hands gripping the fabric of her mother's sweater. The boy reached for Callista's ponytail, his small fist closing around the strands with the possessiveness of a child who knew exactly where safety lived. I stood up, my 6-foot frame suddenly feeling unsteady. The cabin seemed too small, the air too thin. "Callista." My voice came out rougher than I intended, scraped raw by shock and something that felt dangerously close to grief. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. "What do you say to the man you divorced when you're holding his children he never knew existed?" The flight attendant, bless her, read the tension crackling between us like static electricity. She stepped in with professional efficiency, taking the carry-on bags from Callista's trembling hands. "Let me help you get settled, ma'am. Looks like you'll need both hands free for these little ones." The seating arrangement the attendant created felt like the universe had a twisted sense of humor. The little girl was placed in seat 3D, directly next to my 3A. The boy took 3 degrees Celsius beside Callista, separated from me only by the narrow aisle. We were close enough to touch, close enough to hear each other breathe, but we might as well have been on different planets. The plane began its taxi toward the runway. The girl beside me had stopped crying and now regarded me with open curiosity, her thumb tucked securely in her mouth. Her eyes studied my face with an intensity that made my chest tight. Did she see something familiar there? Did some part of her DNA recognize me the way mine was screaming that she was mine? "Her name is Kaya." Callista's voice was barely above a whisper, but I heard every syllable clearly. She wasn't looking at me, her eyes fixed instead on the boy in her arms. "And he's Cray. Kaya and Cray. Kaya Crow and Cray Crow. My children. Children who carried her last name because I hadn't been there to give them mine. Children I'd known nothing about while they took their first breaths, spoke their first words, took their first steps. The fury that rose in my chest was a living thing, hot and sharp and demanding. She'd kept them from me for over 2 years, years of their lives that I could never get back. Milestones I'd missed because she'd decided I didn't deserve to know I was a father. But underneath the anger was something else, something that felt like grief so profound it threatened to swallow me whole. And underneath even that was hope, dangerous, foolish, impossible hope. The plane leveled off, the seatbelt sign dimmed. Around us, other passengers pulled out laptops and books, settling into their flights with the casual indifference of people whose lives weren't imploding at 30,000 feet. I turned to Callista, keeping my voice low enough that only she could hear. Every word felt heavy, loaded with the weight of our long silence. "When were you planning to tell me?" Her hands trembled as she adjusted the small blue blanket wrapped around Cray. "I tried," she whispered. 3 times I tried. That's not an answer." My words came out harder than I meant them to, but I couldn't seem to soften the edges. Not yet. Not when my world was spinning and nothing made sense. "It's the only answer I have." She finally looked at me, and what I saw in her eyes stopped the next angry words in my throat. Fear. Not of me, but of something deeper, something that had taken root during our time apart. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after I filed for divorce. By the time I worked up the courage to tell you, your mother had already made it clear what would happen if I came back into your life. My jaw clenched so hard I felt my teeth grind together. My mother. Of course. Victoria Mercer, the woman who'd orchestrated our separation with the precision of a military general planning a siege. The woman who'd been convinced from day one that Callista had married me for money and status, that she was nothing but a gold digger with a pretty face and calculated charm. The irony twisted like a knife in my gut. Callista had been the only thing in my life that wasn't about money or status. She'd been the only person who looked at me and saw Grant, not the Mercer fortune. She'd been the only one who made me feel like I was enough just as I was. "My mother doesn't speak for me," I said, and the words felt hollow even as I said them. Because 2 years ago, she spoke for me. I'd let her. She did then. There was no accusation in Callista's voice, only exhaustion that ran bone deep. And I was 24, Grant. 24 and terrified and suddenly responsible for 2 babies I hadn't planned for. Your mother showed up at my apartment 3 weeks after I found out I was pregnant. She knew before you did. She'd had me follow. The confession hit me like a physical blow. I'd known my mother was ruthless in business, but this was something else entirely. She offered me money, Callista continued, her voice steady now, like she'd rehearsed these words in her head 1,000 times. A lot of money, enough to ensure the twins and I would never have to worry about anything ever again. But there was a condition. I could never tell you about the pregnancy, never contact you, never let you know these children existed. The world tilted. You took it. Callista didn't flinch at the accusation in my words. She met my eyes head on, and I saw something in them I'd never seen during our marriage, Steele. I took enough to cover my medical expenses and the first 6 months of childcare. The hospital bills for twins delivered early by C-section aren't cheap, Grant. And I needed to make sure I could feed them and keep a roof over their heads while I recovered enough to work again. And the rest? I had to know. I had to understand how the woman I'd loved had become someone who could take money from the woman who destroyed us. I gave the rest back. Her words were quiet but firm. Every penny beyond what I needed for basic survival. It's been sitting in an account I've never touched. Your mother can have it back whenever she wants it. I don't want her money. I never did. Something in my chest loosened. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. She'd been 24 and pregnant with twins and alone because I'd been too much of a coward to fight for her. What choice had I given her? Kaya shifted beside me, her small body leaning slightly toward me like she was testing whether I was safe. Her thumb stayed in her mouth, but her eyes never left my face. She was studying me the way children do, with an honesty that adults forget how to access. "Why now?" I asked Callista, forcing my attention away from the little girl who was half me and half the woman I'd never stopped loving. "Why are you on this plane?" Callista's composure cracked. Her voice broke on the words. "My father had a stroke 3 days ago. He's in a hospital in Denver and the doctors don't know if he's going to make it." The world shifted again, reorganizing itself around this new information. Callista had grown up in a small town just outside Denver, raised by a single father who'd worked as a mechanic at the same shop for 30 years. Robert Crow. I'd met him once before our wedding, a quiet man with calloused hands and kind eyes who'd shaken my hand and told me in no uncertain terms that I'd better take care of his daughter or I'd answer to him. I'd failed that man, failed his daughter, failed the grandchildren he'd never met. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it with everything in me. Despite the anger, despite the betrayal and confusion, I could still feel compassion for her pain. Is he going to be okay? I don't know. Callista wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to maintain some composure in front of the children. Cray watched her face carefully, his little brow furrowed with concern. "The doctors are saying the next 40 to 8 hours are critical, but he's been asking for them, for his grandchildren. I couldn't let him die without meeting Kaya and Cray." The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. She'd kept the twins hidden, protected them from the Mercer family's wealth and power and manipulation. But when faced with her father's mortality, when confronted with the reality that he might never meet his grandchildren, she'd gotten on a plane. even knowing I might be on it. Even knowing this moment of exposure was inevitable. I was in Chicago for a client presentation, she added quietly, as if reading my unspoken question. A major corporate account I couldn't turn down. When I got the call about Dad's stroke 3 days ago, I booked the first available flight back. I never imagined you'd be on it. That took courage I wasn't sure I possessed. The beverage cart appeared, pushed by a different flight attendant with a practiced smile. The interruption felt both intrusive and necessary, giving us a moment to breathe, to reset. Black coffee, I ordered out of habit. The same thing I always ordered, though nothing about this flight was the same as any other. Just water, please, Callista said quietly. Kaya's attention immediately shifted to the cart. She pulled her thumb from her mouth and pointed at the juice boxes with enthusiasm that made my heart clench. Juice, she announced proudly, like she'd just discovered the secret to happiness. The attendant smiled warmly. Apple or orange, sweetheart? Kaya looked at Callista for guidance, and I watched the silent communication pass between mother and daughter. Callista nodded slightly. Apple, Kaya decided with the gravity of someone making a life-altering choice. As the attendant poured apple juice into a small cup with a lid, I caught myself memorizing details I should have known already. Kaya liked apple juice. She asked permission before accepting things from strangers. She had a slight lisp when she said certain words. She trusted her mother absolutely. The attendant handed me my coffee and moved on. Kaya took a sip of her juice, then turned those brown eyes on me again. She tugged at my sleeve with her free hand, demanding my attention with the confidence of a child who'd never learned to doubt her place in the world. Plane, she announced, pointing at the window with her juice cup, causing a small splash that missed her clothes by inches. Careful, baby, Callista said automatically, reaching across the aisle with a napkin. Yes, we're on a plane, I confirmed, my voice gentler than it had been moments before. I took the napkin from Callista and wiped a few drops from Kaya's hand. The simple act of caring for her, even in this small way, felt monumental. Have you been on a plane before? Kaya shook her head, her ponytail bouncing. Then she pointed directly at me, that universal gesture of a toddler asking a question. You? It was such a simple question, the kind any child might ask any stranger sitting next to them. But she wasn't a stranger. She was my daughter, and she didn't know me at all. She didn't know that I'd been on hundreds of planes. She didn't know that I owned part of the airline we were flying on. She didn't know that I would have given every penny of my fortune to have been there the first time she said the word Dada. I travel a lot for work, I told her, feeling the inadequacy of the response in my bones. What I should have said was, I should have been there when you were born. I should have been there for your first smile, your first laugh, your first everything. Callista watched our interaction with an expression I couldn't quite decode. There was pain there, certainly. Regret, maybe, but also something that looked like longing, like she was watching something she'd imagined 1,000 times but never thought she'd actually see. She looks like you when you concentrate, Callista said softly, her professional composure slipping to reveal something raw underneath. Gets this little crease between her eyebrows, same spot as yours. I touched my own forehead self-consciously, feeling the line that appeared when I focused too hard on problems that didn't have easy solutions. And Cray? I needed to know everything, every detail she could give me about the children I'd missed knowing. A ghost of a smile crossed Callista's face, the first real expression of warmth I'd seen since she'd spotted me. He has your stubbornness. Refuses to sleep unless he's figured out exactly how his toy works. Took apart his stuffed rabbit last week to see what made it squeak. I found him at 2 in the morning, surrounded by cotton stuffing, completely satisfied that he'd solved the mystery. The image made something warm bloom in my chest, something that felt dangerously like pride. My son, taking things apart to understand them. That was exactly what I'd done as a child, driving my nanny insane by dismantling every electronic device I could get my hands on. "Does he put them back together?" I asked. "Sometimes." Callista's smile grew a fraction wider. "Other times I find random screws and pieces scattered under his crib, like he's building an inventory for future projects." They were details a father should know. Details I should have learned by living them, not by having them reported to me like second-hand news. The anger threatened to resurface, but Kaya chose that moment to yawn, a tiny sound that somehow dissolved my defenses. She leaned her head against my arm, her small body relaxing into sleep with the absolute trust that only children possess. The weight of her, the warmth of her, the reality of her pressed against me. It was more than I could process. "They're beautiful," I said, my voice rough with emotions I couldn't name. "You did well with them. We did well with them." Callista's correction was gentle but completely firm, a line drawn in. "Sand. They're yours too, Grant. They've always been yours, even when you didn't know about them. I never wanted to keep them from you permanently. I just needed time to figure out how to do this without your family destroying everything I'd built." It was the most honest thing she'd said since I'd seen her on this plane, and it cut deeper than any accusation could have. Because she was right. She was absolutely right. My mother would have made Callista's life unbearable. Victoria Mercer would have fought for custody with every weapon in her considerable arsenal. She would have hired the best lawyers money could buy. She would have used every connection, every favor owed, every bit of leverage she possessed. She would have turned my children into weapons in a war Callista couldn't possibly win. And 2 years ago, I would have let her. I would have stood by and watched it happen because I had been too broken, too angry, too convinced of Callista's betrayal to see the truth. "Things are different now," I said, and I needed her to believe it, even though I barely believed it myself. "I'm different now." Callista met my eyes directly, and the skepticism I saw there was earned. "Are you?" Because the Grant I married would have fought for me, would have stood up to his mother, would have chosen love over legacy. The truth of it landed like a punch to the gut. She was right. When Victoria Mercer had presented me with carefully edited photographs of Callista having lunch with her ex-partner, when she'd spun an elaborate story about Callista using our marriage as a stepping stone to wealth and connections, I'd listened. I'd doubted, and when Callista had refused to defend herself, had simply looked at me with those brown eyes and asked if I trusted her. My silence had been answered enough. She'd filed for divorce the next day. I'd been too proud and too hurt to stop her. The hum of the plane's engines filled the silence between us, a constant reminder that we were suspended between one reality and another. 30,000 feet above the ground, removed from the contexts and pressures that had broken us the first time. Up here, it was just us and the truth we'd been avoiding for 2 years. Kaya had fallen completely asleep against my arm, her breathing steady and peaceful. Her juice cup sat empty in the seat pocket in front of her, and her small hand rested on my sleeve like an anchor. Across the aisle, Cray had also succumbed to sleep, his head tucked against Callista's shoulder in a mirror image of his sister. In sleep, they looked even more alike. 2 halves of the same whole, connected in ways that went beyond genetics. I wondered if they had that twin connection people talked about, if they could sense each other's emotions and finish each other's thoughts. I wondered about a million things I should already know. I was a fool, I said finally, the admission costing me more than I expected. Pride had always been my weakness, the thing my mother had weaponized against me my entire life. I let my mother poison something good because I was too afraid to believe someone could love me for who I am, rather than what I have. Callista's expression softened, some of the defensive walls lowering just slightly. The lunch was with my friend Jordan. He'd just come out to his parents, and they'd disowned him. He needed someone to talk to, someone who wouldn't judge him. We met at that cafe because it was halfway between his apartment and mine. I know that now." The words tasted bitter. "Jordan sent me a message 18 months after you filed for divorce. He was angry that we'd separated, angry that I'd let you go without a fight. He explained everything, his coming out, his parents' reaction, why he'd needed you that day. By then it was too late. You vanished." "I had to vanish," Callista said quietly. "Your mother made it clear that if I stayed in Chicago, if I tried to contact you, she'd make my life hell. And then I found out about the babies, and everything became about protecting them. I couldn't let them become pawns in whatever game she was playing." I thought about my mother, about the woman who'd raised me with expensive gifts and distant affection. Victoria Mercer had never been warm, had never been the kind of mother who bandaged scraped knees or read bedtime stories. She'd been the kind of mother who viewed her son as an extension of the family legacy, a chess piece to be moved strategically on the board of high society and business dealings. "She called you a gold digger from the moment I brought you home," I said, remembering those early days of our relationship. "Said you were too young, too inexperienced, too clearly after the family money." I know what she called me. There was no heat in Callista's words, just exhaustion. She made sure I knew exactly what she thought of me. Every family dinner, every charity event, every moment I tried to be the wife you needed, she was there, reminding me I'd never be good enough for a Mercer. Kaya stirred slightly against my arm, making a small sound before settling back into sleep. I found myself automatically adjusting my position to make sure she stayed comfortable, the gesture instinctive despite my lack of experience. Callista noticed. "You're a natural with her." "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted. "None of us do at first. Parenthood doesn't come with a manual." She paused, then added quietly, "You missed so much, Grant. Their first ultrasound, when I found out there were 2 of them, and nearly passed out in the doctor's office. Their birth, which was terrifying, because they came 3 weeks early and I was alone and scared. Kaya's first word, which was mama at 7 months. Cray's first steps at 10 months, which she took while reaching for a toy car. Their first birthday, when they got cake all over everything and laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world. Each detail felt like a small death. Each milestone I'd missed was a piece of their lives I could never get back, a chapter written without me. Why didn't you reach out after they were born, after you'd had time to recover and figure things out?" "I tried," Callista said, and for the first time I heard anger creep into her voice. "I tried to reach you 3 times in those first few months. Your cell number has been changed. The emails I sent to your personal address were never answered. I suspect they were filtered before they ever reached you. I even wrote you a letter and sent it to your penthouse. It came back marked return to sender. The revelation hit me like ice water. I never got any of it. I never knew you tried. Of course you didn't. Your mother made sure of it." Callista's voice was steady, but I could hear the hurt underneath. So I stopped trying. I focused on keeping my babies healthy and safe. I got a job doing freelance graphic design so I could work from home. I found a small apartment in Boulder, far enough from Chicago that your mother wouldn't think to look for me there. I built a life that didn't include you because I had to. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, to explain that I would have been there if I'd known. But the truth was more complicated. Would I have believed her if she'd gotten through? 2 years ago, broken and angry and convinced of her betrayal, would I have accepted that she was pregnant with my children? Or would I have assumed it was another manipulation, another scheme to get money from the Mercer fortune? The thought made me sick. "I discovered the truth about Jordan 18 months after you left," I said. "Found out my mother had hired a private investigator to follow you, had taken those photos out of context, and built a whole narrative that wasn't real. I tried to find you then, hired my own investigator. But you'd covered your tracks well." "I had to," Callista repeated. "For them, We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 2 years of miscommunication and manipulation settling between us like a physical presence. Around us, the plane continued its journey toward Denver, toward Callista's dying father, toward whatever came next. If this story is hitting you the way it's hitting me, do me a favor right now, hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me, would you forgive Callista for keeping this secret? And if you haven't subscribed to Mr. Steele Rich Stories yet, what are you waiting for? This is where broken hearts find hope, where complicated truths meet second chances. Subscribe so you never miss a story that reminds you what really matters. I looked at Kaya sleeping peacefully against my arm, then at Cray tucked safely against Callista's shoulder. They were innocent in all of this, victims of adult failures and family dysfunction. They deserved better than what we'd given them. They deserved a father who showed up, a family that loved them without conditions, a life that wasn't defined by the mistakes their parents had made. I want to be their father, I said, the words coming from somewhere deep and certain. Not just on paper, not just through child support checks and scheduled visitation. I want bedtime stories and scraped knees and terrible school plays. I want to know their favorite foods and what makes them laugh. I want to be there when they wake up from nightmares and when they're excited about something they learned. I want all of it. Callista studied me for a long moment, her brown eyes searching mine for something I hoped she could find. And their mother? Her voice was barely audible above the engine noise. What about her? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with history and hope and fear. I could have given her the safe answer, the diplomatic one that focused only on co-parenting and shared responsibility. But sitting there with my daughter asleep against my arm, with 2 years of mistakes weighing on my conscience, I found I couldn't lie. Their mother is the bravest person I've ever met, I said carefully, meaning every word. She protected them when I failed to. She made impossible choices because she had to. She raised 2 beautiful children alone because I was too broken and too proud to fight for what mattered. She deserves better than what I gave her before. Tears slipped down Callista's cheeks, silent and unchecked. I never stopped loving you, she whispered. That was the hardest part. I was so angry, so hurt by what you believed about me, by how easily you let me go. But I never stopped loving you, Grant, not even when I hated you. The confession broke something open in my chest. Then let me prove I've changed. I reached across the aisle, my hand extended palm up in offering, an invitation and a plea. Let me meet your father. Let me be there for you through this. And then, when you're ready, when you trust me enough, let me try again, not as the man I was, but as the man I should have been, as the man these children deserve. Callista stared at my hand for what felt like an eternity. Everything hung in the balance, our past, our present, the fragile possibility of our future. In her hesitation, I could see her weighing the risks, calculating what it would cost her to believe in me again. I could see her considering whether I was worth the gamble, whether I'd earned the right to a second chance. Finally, slowly, she placed her hand in mine. Her fingers wove through mine in a gesture that felt both achingly familiar and entirely new. The connection was electric, a circuit completed after years of broken wires and failed connections. One step at a time, she said firmly. For their sake, for all our sake, I agreed, squeezing her hand gently before letting go. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, announcing our initial descent into Denver. Below us, the Rocky Mountains stretched across the horizon, massive and immovable and beautiful in their permanence. But as I looked at Kaya sleeping peacefully against my arm, at Cray's tiny hand clutching Callista's shirt, at the woman who'd had the strength to protect our children when I'd failed them all, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 2 years, something I'd thought was dead and buried under the rubble of our divorce. Hope. The descent into Denver was smooth, the plane cutting through wisps of clouds as the Rocky Mountains grew larger in the windows. Kaya continued to sleep against my arm, her breath warm and steady. Across the aisle, Cray had shifted in his sleep, his small hand now fisted in Callista's sweater like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. The cabin had gone quiet in that way planes do when landing is imminent. Other passengers were gathering their belongings, shutting down devices, preparing for the transition from flight to ground. But in our little bubble, seats 3A, 3 degrees Celsius, and 3D, time felt suspended. Every minute we stayed in the air was another minute we didn't have to face the complications waiting for us on the ground. Callista was the one who finally broke the silence. What happens now? Her voice was quiet but steady, the voice of someone who'd learned to face hard things head-on. When we land, when you've met my father, when reality sets back in and we can't hide up here anymore, what happens then? It was the question I'd been asking myself since the moment I'd seen her. The logical answer was lawyers and custody arrangements and structured visitation schedules. It was paternity, tests and legal documents and carefully worded agreements designed to protect everyone's interests. It was the kind of clean, organized solution that made sense on paper but felt hollow in practice. But logic had never served me well where Callista was concerned. Logic had told me to doubt her when I should have trusted. Logic had told me to protect my pride when I should have protected our marriage. Logic had cost me 2 years with my children. I want to be their father, I said again, because it was the only truth I knew for certain. Not weekend visits and formal schedules. Not the kind of distant parent who sees his kids twice a month and calls it fatherhood. I want bedtime stories and scraped knees and terrible school plays. I want to know what makes them laugh and what scares them. I want to be there when they're sick, when they're happy, when they're figuring out who they are. I want all of it, Callista. The messy, complicated, everyday reality of being a parent. She watched me carefully, looking for cracks in my conviction. That's a pretty picture. But what about the reality of it? What about when your board meetings conflict with Kaya's doctor appointments? When Cray is sick and you have to cancel a flight to Tokyo? When being their father means choosing them over the empire you've spent your whole life building? Then I choose them, I said without hesitation. Every single time. You say that now. I mean it now. I kept my voice low, aware of Kaya sleeping beside me, but there was steel underneath the quietness. I've spent 2 years building an empire that doesn't mean anything, Callista. I've closed deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, expanded into new markets, increased shareholder value by 40%. I've done everything my mother and the board expected of me, and I've been miserable every single day of it because none of it matters. None of it fills the hole that losing you left behind. Callista's eyes glistened, but she blinked back the tears. And their mother? She asked again, circling back to the question I'd partially answered before. Where does she fit into this picture of bedtime stories and school plays? I looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not just the girl I'd married but the woman she'd become. The past 2 years had changed her in ways that went beyond the physical. There was a strength in her now that hadn't been there before, a certainty in who she was that my mother's criticisms and society's expectations hadn't been able to touch. She'd faced single parenthood and financial uncertainty and the weight of raising 2 children alone. And she'd emerged stronger for it. She'd become someone I could fall in love with all over again if she'd let me. Someone I was. Already falling for, if I was honest with myself. Their mother, I said carefully, choosing each word with precision, is the bravest person I've ever met. She made impossible choices because she had to protect the people she loved. She built a life from nothing because I failed her. She became the kind of parent I want to be, present, selfless, willing to sacrifice anything for her children's well-being. That's not what I asked. Callista's voice was gentle but insistent. I know what you asked. I took a breath, aware that what I said next would define everything that came after. You asked where you fit. And the truth is, I don't know yet. I don't know if you can forgive me for failing you. I don't know if you can trust me again after everything my family put you through. I don't know if what we had before can be rebuilt, or if we have to start completely new. The honesty seemed to surprise her. So what are you saying? I'm saying I want to try. I kept my eyes locked on hers, letting her see the truth of it. I want to prove to you that I've changed, that I learned from my mistakes, that I'm capable of being the partner you needed me to be before. But the first also know that wanting something doesn't mean I deserve it. You've spent 2 years building a life without me, raising our children without me, becoming the person you are without me. I don't have the right to just insert myself into that and expect you to make room. But you want me to. It wasn't a question. Yes, I admitted. God help me, yes. I want another chance, Callista. Not because I think we can go back to what we were. We can't. Too much has happened. But because I think we could build something better, something stronger, something based on truth instead of my mother's manipulations and my own insecurities. Callista looked out the window, watching the mountains grow closer. You hurt me, Grant. Not just when you believed your mother's lies, but before that. You hurt me every time you chose the company over our marriage, every time you cancelled dinner because of a board meeting, every time you let your mother criticize me without defending me. The lunch with Jordan was just the final straw, but the cracks were already there. Each accusation landed true. I'd been a terrible husband long before the divorce, too focused on proving myself to my mother and the board to see what I was losing at home. I know, I said quietly. I was so busy trying to be the son my mother wanted that I forgot to be the husband you needed. I let the company consume me because that felt safer than being vulnerable with you. I was a coward, Callista, and I'm more sorry for that than I know how to. Express. Kaya stirred against my arm, making a small sound before settling back into sleep. The movement drew both our attention, a reminder of what was at stake in this conversation. It wasn't just about us anymore. It was about 2 children who deserved better than what we'd given them so far. They deserve stability, Callista said, reading my thoughts. They deserve to know their father, but they also deserve to not be caught in the middle of adult drama. If we do this, if we try to figure out what comes next, we have to put them first. Always. Agreed, I said immediately. Whatever happens between us, they come first. The plane's wheels touched down with a gentle bump, the landing smooth and practiced. The cabin filled with the sounds of passengers gathering their things, phones turning back on with a chorus of notification sounds, the general rustle of people preparing to re-enter their lives on the ground. But Callista and I sat still, the weight of our conversation holding us in place. Kaya woke slowly, blinking against the bright cabin lights. Cray remained asleep, determined to squeeze every last second of rest from the flight. One step at a time, Callista repeated her earlier words, but this time they felt less like a warning and more like a promise. You meet my father. You prove you can show up when it matters. You figure out how to be a father to Kaya and Cray, and then, maybe then, we can talk about what comes after. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. It was a door left open, an invitation to prove myself, a chance I didn't deserve but would take anyway. One step at a time, I agreed. The plane taxied to the gate. Around us, passengers stood and stretched, pulled bags from overhead bins, and made plans for their time in Denver. Normal people with normal lives, unaware that in seats 3A and 3 degrees Celsius, 2 people were negotiating the architecture of their future. Kaya rubbed her eyes and looked at me with sleepy confusion, like she'd forgotten I was there. Then recognition dawned, and she offered me a shy smile. "Plane stop?" "Yes, sweetheart. The plane stopped. We're in Denver now." The endearment slipped out naturally, and I saw Callista's expression soften at the sound of it. "See, Grandpa?" Kaya asked, looking to her mother for confirmation. Callista's face crumpled slightly before she composed herself. "Yes, baby. We're going to see Grandpa." The gate agent's voice came over the speaker, announcing that passengers could begin deplaning. I stood, careful not to disturb Kaya, and reached for the overhead bin where Callista's bags were stored. The simple act of helping felt significant, a small gesture toward the partnership I wanted to rebuild. Callista gathered Cray, who protested briefly at being woken before settling against her shoulder with resigned sleepiness. We moved into the aisle together, part of the slow shuffle of passengers heading toward the exit. At the plane door, the flight attendant who'd helped Callista board offered a knowing smile. "Beautiful family," she said warmly. Neither of us corrected her. Denver International Airport was chaos in the way all major airports are. A controlled symphony of announcements and rushing travelers, and the eternal smell of coffee and jet fuel. We emerged from the jetway into the terminal, and I watched Callista navigate it all with practiced efficiency despite carrying a sleeping toddler and managing a diaper bag that looked heavier than it should be. Kaya walked beside me, her small hand tucked into mine with a trust that made my chest ache. She'd accepted my presence with the easy adaptability of children, asking no questions about who I was or why I was suddenly there. To her, I was just a friendly adult who'd sat next to her on the plane. The simplicity of it was both beautiful and heartbreaking. "The rental car place is this way," Callista said, adjusting Cray's weight on her hip. "I have a reservation for—" "Cancel it," I said gently. "I have a car waiting. Driver too. Let me help with this at least." I watched her calculate, weighing pride against practicality. Pride won a lot of battles for Callista, but practicality won the war. "Okay," she agreed quietly. "Thank you." The car was exactly where I'd texted my assistant to arrange it, a black SUV with a professional driver named Marcus, who'd worked for my family for years. He took one look at the situation and moved immediately into action, loading bags into the trunk, while I helped Callista secure the twins into car seats that had miraculously appeared in the back seat. "You planned this," Callista said, as I buckled Kaya in with fumbling fingers that didn't quite know what they were doing. "I texted my assistant while you were in the bathroom on the plane," I admitted. "Asked him to arrange for car seats appropriate for 18-month-olds. I hope he got it right." Callista checked my work on Kaya's buckle, adjusted it slightly, then nodded. "He got it right." We settled into the SUV, Callista and I in the middle row with the twins behind us, visible and close. Denver spread out beyond the windows, all wide skies and distant mountains, so different from Chicago's concrete and glass towers. "What hospital?" Marcus asked from the driver's seat. "St. Joseph's," Callista answered. "The cardiac unit. The drive gave us time to talk, though the conversation was different now. Less about us, more about them. Callista told me about the past 2 years in fragments, moving to a small apartment in Boulder, freelancing as a graphic designer, while the twins napped, struggling through the early months when neither baby would sleep more than 2 hours at a time. "The first 6 months were brutal," she admitted, staring out the window at the passing landscape. "I was so tired I hallucinated once. I saw my high school calculus teacher in the grocery store and had a full conversation with him before I realized I was talking to a display of paper towels." Despite everything, I laughed. "That's terrifying." "That's parenthood," she corrected. "It gets easier, but those early days? I understand why sleep deprivation is used as a torture technique. Did you have help? Friends, family?" I hated asking, hated knowing she'd gone through it alone because I hadn't been there. Some friends from college helped when they could. My neighbor Mrs. Chen would watch them sometimes so I could shower or sleep for a few hours, and there were support groups for single parents that kept me sane. She paused. Your checks helped too. I'd been sending child support since the divorce, routed through lawyers, never acknowledged. You could have asked for more. I didn't need more. I needed a partner, but money was adequate in its absence. The words stung because they were true. I'd thought money could substitute for presence, that financial support was the same as actually showing up. It had taken losing everything to learn. How wrong I'd been. Behind us, Kaya started singing something that might have been Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, or might have been an entirely different song. It was hard to tell with toddler pronunciation. Cray joined in with enthusiasm that exceeded his pitch accuracy by a considerable margin. Callista turned to watch them, her face softening in that way parents' faces do when their children are being unconsciously adorable. They sing everywhere, the grocery store, the bathtub, the doctor's office. No concept of appropriate venues for concerts. I can't carry a tune either, I admitted. My mother paid for voice lessons when I was 8. The instructor quit after 3 months and told her I was unteachable, so that's where they get it. There was something almost like warmth in her voice, a tentative friendliness that felt like progress. We fell into silence as Denver's suburbs gave way to the city proper. I watched Callista from the corner of my eye, seeing the tension increase in her shoulders as we got closer to the hospital. Her father was dying. Whatever complicated emotions existed between us paled in comparison to what she was about to face. Tell me about your father, I said. I only met him once, before the wedding. He seemed like a good man. Callista's expression softened with love and grief in equal measure. He's the best man I know. Raised me by himself after my mom died when I was 6. I worked 60-hour weeks at the mechanic shop, so I could have dance lessons and art supplies and college tuition. Never complained, never made me feel like a burden. Just loved me unconditionally in this quiet, steady way that made me feel safe no matter what. He told me to take care of you or answer to him, I remembered. That sounds like him. A sad smile crossed her face. Very few words, but the ones he used mattered. I called him 3 days ago to tell him I was coming to visit and bring the twins. He cried on the phone. He said he'd been waiting to meet them since I told him I was pregnant. Said grandchildren were the reward for not screwing up your own kids too badly. The love in her voice was palpable. This was a man who'd done it right, who'd raised a daughter strong enough to survive my family's attacks, and brave enough to protect her children at any cost. I was about to meet him while he was dying, while he was weak and vulnerable in a hospital bed, and I was going to have to look him in the eye knowing I'd failed the daughter he'd sacrificed everything to raise. The thought terrified me. St. Joseph's Hospital appeared ahead, all modern glass and careful landscaping designed to make a place of suffering feel less terrible. Marcus pulled up to the main entrance, and suddenly the abstract concept of meeting Callista's father became immediate and real. Callista unbuckled Cray while I fumbled with Kaya's car seat straps, my hands less confident than they'd been at the airport. Kaya watched me struggle with patient curiosity, like she was assessing whether I was competent enough to be trusted with important tasks. "The button on the side," Callista said gently, reaching over to show me. The buckle released with a satisfying click. Right. The button on the side. I'd remember that for next time, if there was a next time. We made our way through the hospital lobby, all sanitized surfaces and hushed voices and that particular smell hospitals have that's part antiseptic and part institutional cafeteria food. Callista navigated it with the confidence of someone who'd been making this trip for days, holding Cray while I carried Kaya and the diaper bag that weighed approximately 1,000 pounds. The cardiac unit was on the 4th floor. The elevator ride was silent, except for Kaya's running commentary on the buttons and how they lit up when pressed. By the time we reached the 4th floor, she'd provided a comprehensive analysis of elevator button technology that would have made any engineer proud. Callista stopped outside room 417, her hand on the door handle. "He doesn't know about you," she said quietly. "I mean, he knows you're the father, obviously. But he doesn't know you're here. I didn't tell him because I didn't know if—" She stopped, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. "It's okay," I said, though it wasn't. Nothing about this was okay. But we were here now, and there was no going back. She pushed open the door. Robert Crowe looked smaller than I remembered. The man who'd shaken my hand firmly at our wedding rehearsal, who'd fixed cars with his bare hands for 3 decades, who'd raised Callista to be strong and independent. That man had been diminished by illness and hospital beds and the cruel arithmetic of strokes. But his eyes were still sharp. They tracked our entrance with immediate alertness, moving from Callista to the twins to me. I watched recognition and confusion, and then something that might have been hope cross his face in rapid succession. "Callie." His voice was weaker than it should have been, slightly slurred on one side from the stroke's damage, but the love in it was unmistakable. "You brought my babies." Callista's composure cracked. She moved to his bedside, Cray still on her hip, and bent to kiss her father's forehead. "Hi, Daddy. Yeah, I brought them. This is Kaya and Cray, your grandchildren." Robert's eyes filled with tears that spilled over immediately. "Look at them. They're perfect." Kaya had been quiet during the exchange, watching her grandfather with the cautious curiosity of a toddler meeting someone new. But when Robert smiled at her with such pure grandfatherly love, something in her relaxed. She climbed onto the small stool beside the bed, clearly placed there by nurses who understood that visitors came in all sizes, and peered at her grandfather with growing confidence. "Hi, Grandpa," she said, her earlier shyness forgotten. Robert made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Hi, sweetheart. Come closer so I can see you properly." Kaya climbed onto the small stool beside the bed, clearly placed there by nurses who understood that visitors came in all sizes, and peered at her grandfather with the intensity of a scientist examining a fascinating specimen. "You have lines." She pointed at his face. "I do," Robert agreed, his voice warm despite its weakness. "Those are called wrinkles. You get them when you're old." "I don't have lines." Kaya seemed pleased by this fact. "That's because you're young and perfect." Robert looked at Callista. "She's exactly like you were at this age. Fearless and curious and completely unconcerned with social conventions." "She takes after her father in that too," Callista said, and I realized with a start that she was looking at me. Robert's eyes followed her gaze, really seeing me for the first time. The warmth in his expression cooled considerably. "Grant Mercer, Mr. Crowe." I moved closer to the bed, but kept a respectful distance. "It's good to see you again. I wish it were under better circumstances. I wish a lot of things were under better circumstances." There was steel in his weak voice, the strength of a father who'd protect his daughter even from a hospital bed. "I told you to take care. Of her, I know, sir, I failed. There's no excuse for that." Robert studied me for a long moment, his gaze uncomfortably perceptive despite his weakened state. "You didn't know about them. It wasn't a question." "No, sir. I just found out today, on the plane, and now you're here, still assessing, still judging." "Yes, sir." Callista had moved around the bed to set Cray down in a chair, and now she stood between her father and me like a buffer between two worlds. "Daddy, Grant and I have a lot to figure out, but right now I just wanted you to meet your grandchildren. I wanted them to meet their grandfather, the reminder of why we were here, the urgency of his condition, the limited time remaining, softened something in Robert's expression. He reached out a shaking hand toward Cray, who had been watching the exchange with wide eyes. "Come here, young man. Let me look at you." Cray hesitated, looking to his mother for permission. At Callista's encouraging nod, he slid off the chair and approached the bed with considerably more caution than his sister had shown. But when Robert smiled at him, Cray smiled back, and I saw Mercer's stubbornness melt in the face of grandfatherly love. "You're going to be tall like your father," Robert observed. "Got his build already. He's going to be a heartbreaker, too," Callista added. "Already knows how to use those eyes to get extra cookies." I watched the scene unfold. Callista's father meeting his grandchildren for the first time, storing up memories to carry him through whatever came next. The love in the room was palpable, almost suffocating in its intensity. This was what family was supposed to look like. Not my mother's cold manipulations and strategic alliances, but this, messy and real and full of the kind of love that didn't calculate cost before giving. Robert turned his attention back to me, and I braced myself for whatever was coming. "You planning to stick around this time?" "Yes, sir." "Are you planning to let your mother run your life and ruin my daughter's?" The question was direct and deserved. "No, sir. I've spent the last 2 years learning exactly what I lost when I let that happen. I won't make that mistake again." "Words are easy," Robert said. "Each syllable an effort. Being a father is hard. Being a husband is harder. Are you ready for hard?" I thought about the past 2 years of empty success, of business victories that meant nothing, of going through motions without purpose. I thought about seeing Callista on that plane, about meeting Kaya and Cray, about the sudden clarity that had come with understanding exactly what I'd lost. "I'm ready to try," I said honestly. "I'm ready to fail and learn, and keep trying until I get it right. I'm ready to put them first, even when it costs me, especially when it costs me." Robert searched my face for signs of deception, for the weakness he'd seen 2 years ago. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy something in him, because he nodded slowly. "My Callie is the strongest person I know," he said, his voice fading slightly. "Raised herself half the time when I was working. Survived losing her mother. Survived losing you. Survived everything and still became someone kind and good and capable of love. You don't deserve her." "I know I don't. But those babies deserve a father who shows up. And if you're really committed to being that father, then I'm going to hold you to it." Robert's hand shook as he pointed at me. "You protect them, all 3 of them. You stand between them and anyone who tries to hurt them, including your own family. You understand me?" "Yes, sir." The promise felt sacred, spoken in this hospital room with Callista's dying father and our children as witnesses. Real talk, this moment right here. This is what Mr. Steele Rich Stories is all about. Healing, second chances, family. If this is hitting you in the chest, share this video. Comment below with the most meaningful family moment you've experienced. And subscribe, so you never miss these stories that remind us what really matters, the people we love and the promises we keep. Robert seemed to relax slightly, his mission accomplished. He turned his attention back to Kaya and Cray, and his expression transformed from stern father to adoring grandfather in an instant. "Come here, both of you. Let me tell you about your grandmother. She would have loved you so much." The next hour passed in a blur of stories and laughter and tears. Robert told the twins about their grandmother, about how she'd loved to dance and sing and make terrible jokes. He told them about Callista as a little girl, about the time she'd tried to fix his truck at age 6 and had accidentally drained all the oil onto the garage floor. He told them about the first time Callista had brought home an art project from school, a painting of their family that had consisted mostly of enthusiastic splashes of color with no recognizable shapes. Kaya and Cray listened with the partial attention of toddlers, understanding maybe half of what was said, but absorbing the love underneath the words. They climbed onto Robert's bed carefully, mindful of the tubes and wires, and snuggled against him while he talked. I stood back and watched, documenting it all in my memory because I knew Callista would want to remember this. Her father and her children, together for the first time. 3 generations connected by love and DNA and the kind of bond that transcended circumstances. Callista stood beside me, tears streaming silently down her face. I wanted to reach for her hand, to offer comfort, but I wasn't sure if I'd earned that right yet, so I just stood close enough that she'd know I was there if she needed me. "Thank you," she whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. For what? For being here, for not making this harder than it already is. She wiped her eyes. My father needed this, needed to know they'd be okay, that they'd have family beyond just me. Before I could respond, Robert called out to us. "Grant, Callie, come here." We moved to the bedside together. Kaya had fallen asleep against Robert's shoulder, her small hand clutched in his. Cray was fighting sleep but losing, his eyes drooping despite his best efforts to stay alert. "I don't know how much time I have left," Robert said bluntly, because apparently the Crow family didn't believe in dancing around hard truths. Could be days, could be weeks. "But I need to know before I go that you two are going to figure this out. For them." "Daddy," Callista started. "Let me finish." Robert's strength was fading, his words coming slower. "I raised you to be strong, Callie, strong enough to survive anything. But I also raised you to know the difference between protecting yourself and shutting people out. He made mistakes, bad ones, but people deserve second chances when they're willing to do the work to earn them." He turned his gaze to me. "And you've got a lot to prove, but I can see you want to prove it. That's a start. Don't waste the chance you're getting. And don't you dare let your mother poison this again." "I won't," I promised. "You have my word." "Your word didn't mean much before," Robert said, brutal in his honesty. "But maybe that's changed. Maybe you've changed." He paused, gathering strength. "Take care of my daughter. Take care of my grandchildren. Build something real with them. And if you can't do that, if you fail them again, you'll answer me. Dead or alive, you'll answer me." The threat should have been empty. What could a dying man do? But something in Robert Crow's eyes made it clear that even death wouldn't stop him from protecting his family if he needed to. "I understand," I said, and I did. Robert nodded, satisfied. He looked at his sleeping granddaughter, at his nearly sleeping grandson, and smiled with such pure joy that it transformed his face. "They're perfect, Callie. You did good. We did good, Daddy." "They're Grant's too." It was the first time she'd acknowledged it so directly, and hearing it made something settle in my chest. "Our children. Not hers, not mine, but ours." A nurse appeared in the doorway, gentle but firm in the way medical professionals are when visiting hours have run too long, and patients need rest. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Crow really should get some sleep now." Callista nodded, carefully extracting Kaya from her father's embrace while I collected Cray. We gathered our things quietly, the weight of the visit settling on us like a blanket. At the door, Robert called out one more time. "Callie?" She turned back. "Yeah, Daddy?" "I love you, baby girl. Always have, always will. I love you too, Daddy. We'll be back tomorrow." We left him there in that sterile hospital room, a man who'd done everything right, watching his daughter walk away with the family she'd built from the wreckage he'd tried to prevent. I wondered if he felt like he'd failed her by not being able to protect her from my family's cruelty. I hoped he understood that everything strong and good about Callista came directly from him. We made it to the hospital lobby before my phone rang. The name on the screen made my blood run cold, Mother. Callista saw my expression and stopped walking. "Your mother?" "Yes." I stared at the phone, watching it ring. She probably has someone monitoring my credit card transactions. The rental car charge from the airport would have tipped her off. That's how she'd always worked. Information networks and paper trails, not private investigators tailing people through the streets. She probably has someone monitoring my credit card transactions. The rental car charge from the airport would have tipped her off. That's how she'd always worked. Information networks and paper trails, not private investigators, tailing people through the streets. You stayed off her radar by keeping your own name off everything official, didn't you? All cash, no digital footprints. Callista nodded. My landlord let me pay rent in cash, no credit cards in my name. I was careful. You don't have to answer, Callista said quietly, shifting Cray to her other hip. But I did have to answer, because this moment had been coming since the second I'd seen Callista on that plane. This was the confrontation I'd avoided when it mattered. I'd failed then. I wouldn't fail now. I answered the phone. Mother, Grant. Victoria Mercer's voice was ice wrapped in silk, cultured and cold. Imagine my surprise when I received a call informing me that my son was seen entering St. Joseph's Hospital in Denver with a woman and 2 children. You can imagine my further surprise when that woman was identified as your ex-wife. I glanced at Callista, saw the fear and resignation in her eyes. She'd been here before, 2 years ago, when my mother had shown up at her apartment with threats and checkbooks. She thought she knew how this would end. But I am different now. I had to be. Her name is Callista, I said calmly, and yes, I'm with her. We ran into each other on a flight to Denver. How convenient. The skepticism in my mother's voice could have cut glass. And the children? Here it was. The moment of truth. I could downplay it, avoid it, buy myself time to figure out how to manage my mother's reaction. Or I could be honest and face whatever came next. I chose honesty. They're mine, Mother. Kaya and Cray. Your grandchildren. They're 18 months old, and I just met them today. The silence on the other end of the line lasted approximately 3 seconds. Then, I'm getting on a plane. I'll be in Denver in 4 hours. Do not make any decisions until I arrive. No. Another silence, this one shocked. I couldn't remember the last time I'd told my mother no about anything. Excuse me? I said no. You're not coming to Denver. You're not meeting my children. And you're definitely not involving yourself in this situation. My voice was steady, certain in a way it hadn't been 2 years ago. This is my family, and I'm handling it. Your family? Victoria's laugh was sharp and humorless. Grant, you barely know these children. You have no idea if they're even yours. This woman kept them from you for 2 years. Clearly she's capable of deception. You need legal counsel, paternity testing, a custody attorney who can... I know they're mine. I watched Kaya playing with the zipper on Callista's bag, watched Cray's head nodding against her shoulder as sleep tried to claim him. I don't need a paternity test to tell me what I already know. They're mine. You're being emotional and irrational. This is exactly what she wants. For you to feel obligated, to make promises you can't keep because of some misguided sense of responsibility. She didn't tell me I had children because you threatened her. The words came out hard, all the anger I'd been suppressing for 2 years finally finding its target. You showed up at her apartment when she was pregnant and scared and alone. You offered her money to disappear. You made it clear that if she came back into my life, you'd destroy her. I was protecting you. You were controlling me. I'd never interrupted my mother before. The shock of it reverberated through the phone line. You've been controlling me my entire life, controlling who I dated, who I married, how I ran the company, every decision I made. And I let you, because I thought that's what being a good son meant. I thought making you proud was the same as being successful. Grant, you're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in years. I looked at Callista, saw the tears streaming down her face, saw the hope and fear warring in her expression. You destroyed my marriage because you couldn't accept that I'd chosen someone you didn't approve of. You kept my children from me because you thought you knew better than I did what I needed. You've spent my entire life making decisions for me because you don't trust me to make them myself. I have always acted in your best interest. No, you've acted in the company's best interest, in the family legacy's best interest, in your own interest, but never in mine. The truth of it settled over me like a weight lifting rather than one descending. I'm done, Mother. I'm done letting you run my life. I'm done choosing the company over the people I love. I'm done being the son you want, instead of the man I need to be. Victoria's voice went cold, all pretense of maternal concern evaporating. If you pursue this, if you insert yourself into this woman's life and claim these children, there will be consequences. The board will not approve. Your position at the company. I don't care. 3 words, simple and true and absolutely terrifying. You don't care? She sounded genuinely shocked. You've spent your entire adult life building your reputation at Mercer Industries. You're 2 years away from becoming CEO. You're willing to throw that away for a woman who lied to you and children you barely know? Yes. No hesitation. If that's what it takes, yes, you're making a mistake, Grant. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. For once in my life, I'm making my own choice. I took a breath, steadying myself for what came next. And here's my choice, Mother. I choose them. I chose Callista and Kaya and Cray. I choose being a father over being CEO. I choose love over legacy. And if that means walking away from Mercer Industries, if that means you write me out of your will, if that means I lose everything you think defines me, so be it. You're being foolish and emotional. When you calm down, I am calm. I'm calmer than I've been in 2 years. I watched Kyle look up at me, those brown eyes curious and trusting. You can try to fight me on this. You can hire lawyers and try for custody and make all our lives miserable. But you'll lose, Mother, because I'm not going to let you do to my children what you did to me. I'm not going to let them grow up thinking love is conditional on performance and approval. If you do this, there's no coming back. Victoria's voice had gone quiet, but the threat underneath was clear. You'll be choosing them over your family. You're not my family. Not anymore. The words should have hurt more than they did. My family is here in Denver, and I'm going to protect them from you, whatever that takes. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, adrenaline flooding my system like I'd just fought a physical battle instead of a verbal one. But underneath the shaking was something else, relief, freedom, the exhilaration of finally standing up for what mattered. Callista stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. Shock, definitely, but also something that looked like awe. You just chose us over Mercer Industries, she said slowly, like she was testing whether the words were real. I chose us over a legacy that never made me happy, I corrected. The company will survive without me. It'll probably thrive. My mother will make sure of it. But Kaya and Cray, they only get one father, and I'm done being absent from their lives. Kaya tugged on my pant leg. Man, okay? I crouched down so I was at her eye level. Yes, sweetheart, I'm okay. Actually, I'm better than okay. She seemed satisfied with this answer and went back to investigating the interesting textures of the hospital lobby furniture. Cray had fully fallen asleep against Callista's shoulder, oblivious to the fact that his existence had just prompted his father to burn down his entire previous life. Your mother won't give up, Callista said quietly. She'll fight this. She'll try to take them from us. Let her try. I stood, surprised by my own certainty. I have the best lawyers money can buy. I have resources she can't touch because they're in my name, not the company's. And I have something she doesn't. I actually love my children. Any court will see that. Courts favor mothers, especially when fathers have been absent. Then we won't let it get to court. I looked at her directly. We'll figure this out together, Callista. CO parenting arrangements, legal custody, whatever makes sense. But we'll do it together, as partners, without lawyers turning our children into battlefield casualties. She searched my face for something, and whatever she found made her shoulders relax slightly. Okay, together. Marcus appeared from wherever he'd been waiting. Perfect timing as always. Ready to go, sir? Yes. Callista, do you have a hotel? She nodded. A small place near the hospital. Nothing fancy. Come stay at my hotel. It's the Ritz downtown. They have suites with multiple rooms, better security, room service that can accommodate toddler schedules. When I saw her hesitation, I added, separate bedrooms, obviously. This isn't about us. It's about making sure you and the twins are safe if my mother decides to send people to harass you. The practicality won out over pride again. Okay, we'll need to get our things from my hotel first. Of course, the drive across Denver was quiet. Kaya had finally succumbed to sleep in her car seat, and Cray continued his nap with the dedication of a professional sleeper. Callista stared out the window, processing everything that had happened in the past few hours. Thank you, she said finally, for standing up to your mother, for choosing us. I should have done it 2 years ago. I should have fought for you then. You weren't ready then. She turned to look at me. Maybe you needed to lose everything to understand what mattered. Maybe it was a generous interpretation of my failure, but I'd take it. What happens now? Now we pack my bags, move to the Ritz, and figure out one day at a time how to be parents to 2 toddlers who are about to turn our lives completely upside down. I think they already have. Callista smiled, small but genuine. Grant? Yeah? I'm glad you were on that plane. It was the kindest thing she'd said to me since the divorce, and it felt like an absolution I hadn't earned but desperately needed. Me too, Callista. Me too. Robert Crow died 6 days after our hospital visit, peacefully in his sleep with Callista holding his hand. The doctors said it was the stroke's damage finally overwhelming his system, that there was nothing anyone could have done. But I thought maybe he'd held on long enough to meet his grandchildren, long enough to extract promises from me and bless whatever fragile thing was growing between Callista and me. Once he'd done those things, maybe he'd felt free to let go. The funeral was small, exactly what Robert would have wanted. Friends from the mechanic shop, neighbors from the street where he'd raised Callista, the regulars from his favorite diner who'd been getting coffee and advice from him for 30 years. People who'd known him as Rob, who'd valued his quiet wisdom and steady presence. I stood at the back during the service, holding Kaya while Callista held Cray, and delivered a eulogy that broke everyone's heart with its honesty and love. She talked about a man who'd taught her to change her own oil and to stand up for herself. A man who'd worked himself to exhaustion so she could have opportunities he'd never had. A man who'd loved her mother so completely that even 20 years after her death, he'd never seriously dated anyone else. My father taught me that love is a verb, Callista said, her voice strong despite the tears. That it's something you do, not something you say. He showed up for me every single day of my life, and in the end, that's what love is, showing up even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Her eyes found mine across the small funeral home, and I understood the message. Show up, be present, do the work. I intended to do exactly that. The week after the funeral was a blur of legal paperwork and logistical nightmares. Paternity tests that confirmed what we already knew. Kaya and Cray were mine, genetically and legally. The tests were required for the birth certificate amendments, a bureaucratic necessity that felt both invasive and validating. Birth certificates amended to include my name in the father line, a correction of absence reduced to updated government documents. We had conversations about last names. Long conversations late at night in the Ritz suite after the twins had finally, mercifully gone to sleep. Callista wanted them to keep Crow as a middle name, a tribute to her father and their heritage. I wanted them to have Mercer so the world would know they were mine, so my mother couldn't claim they weren't really family. We compromised. Kaya Crow Mercer and Craig Crow Mercer. A mouthful of names that represented complicated families and second chances and the blending of two lives that had been forcibly separated. True to her word, my mother fought. She hired attorneys who filed motions questioning my fitness as a parent, who demanded supervised visitation and psych evaluations. She leaked stories to the press about the secret children and the scandalous reunion, trying to control the narrative and paint Callista as a gold digger who'd trapped me with the pregnancy. I fought back harder. My attorneys were better, my resources deeper, and most importantly, my motivation purer. This wasn't about winning or controlling or maintaining an image. This was about protecting my children and the woman who'd raised them when I couldn't. After 6 weeks of increasingly expensive legal battles, Victoria Mercer's attorneys reached out with a settlement offer. She'd drop all custody challenges and public attacks if I agreed to step down from my position at Mercer Industries and sign away any claim to the CEO position. The implication was clear. If I refused, the legal war would continue indefinitely, traumatizing the twins and draining resources. It was a calculated move. She knew I'd already chosen family over company, but she wanted to extract maximum cost from my defiance. I accepted before they'd finished explaining the terms. My personal investments and trust funds were separate from the company, money my grandfather had left me directly, untouchable by my mother. I'd be fine financially, more than fine. "You just gave away $1 billion company," Callista said when I told her, her eyes wide with shock. "I gave away a company I never wanted in the first place," I corrected. "My mother can have it. She'll run it better than I ever would have anyway. She actually loves it. But what will you do?" It was a fair question. I'd spent my entire adult life preparing to run Mercer Industries, building skills and connections and expertise that were all oriented toward that single goal. Walking away meant starting over completely. The prospect was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "I have some ideas," I said. "But first, I want to focus on learning how to be a father. Everything else can wait." So that's what I did. I extended my stay in Denver indefinitely, renting a furnished house in Boulder near Callista's apartment. I learned the intricacies of toddler schedules, the precise time Kaya needed her afternoon nap or she'd become unbearable, the specific brand of yogurt Cray would eat, and the 17 brands he'd reject. I learned that Kaya was fearless about everything except loud noises, and that Cray was cautious about new experiences but loyal once he decided someone was safe. I learned to change diapers with something approaching competence, to mix formulas at exactly the right temperature, to negotiate with a determined 18-month-old about wearing shoes when all she wanted was to be barefoot, to read the same book 17 times in a row because Cray had decided it was the only acceptable bedtime story. Callista watched my efforts with a mixture of amusement and something that looked like affection. We were careful with each other, two people learning to navigate shared parenting without the framework of a romantic relationship. We didn't talk about us, about what we were or what we might become. We talked about the twins' sleep schedules and upcoming doctor's appointments and whether Kaya's vocabulary was advanced for her age. It was mundane and exhausting and the most fulfilling thing I'd ever done. 6 weeks after Robert's funeral, Callista suggested we take the twins to the Denver Zoo. It was a warm spring day, perfect for outdoor activities, and she thought the animals would be a good distraction from the trauma of losing their grandfather and the chaos of the past weeks. The zoo was crowded with families and school groups, everyone enjoying the sunshine and the giraffes. Kaya wanted to see everything immediately and simultaneously, pulling me in 17 different directions while narrating her observations with the confidence of a seasoned nature documentarian. Cray was more methodical, studying each animal carefully before announcing his judgment, big or scary or funny. We stopped at the elephant exhibit, and Kaya's running commentary reached new heights of enthusiasm. Big nose, big ears. Callista laughed, the sound genuine and unguarded in a way it hadn't been in weeks. Yes, elephants are very big. I want to touch it, Kaya announced, reaching toward the elephants who were safely behind barriers designed by people who understood toddler determination. We can't touch the elephants, baby, Callista explained patiently. But we can watch them. See how they use their trunks to pick up food? Kaya watched, fascinated, as an elephant demonstrated the multi-purpose utility of its trunk. I want a nose like that. Your nose is perfect the way it is, I said, tapping her nose gently. She grabbed my hand and studied it seriously. Your hand is big. That's because I'm bigger than you. I get big too? Someday, yes. You'll grow up and get bigger. This seemed to satisfy her. She turned her attention back to the elephants, content to watch now that she understood her eventual bigness was assured. Cray had been quiet, studying the elephants with intense focus. Finally, he tugged on Callista's hand. Dada? He pointed at me. The words stopped time. Everyone froze. Me, Callista, probably several nearby strangers who'd been inadvertently listening to our conversation. It was the first time either twin had called me anything beyond man, or occasionally Grant when Callista used my name. Callista crouched down to Cray's level. Yes, baby, that's your Dada. Cray looked at me, processing this information with the seriousness he brought to all new concepts. Dada, he repeated, testing the word. Yeah, buddy, I'm your Dada. My voice came out rough, thick with emotions I hadn't been prepared to feel in front of the elephant exhibit at the Denver Zoo. Kaya, never one to miss out on anything, immediately joined in. Dada, that's my Dada too. That's right, Callista confirmed, her own voice suspiciously unsteady. You both have the same Dada. The twins seemed pleased by this arrangement. They took turns saying Dada with increasing enthusiasm, apparently enjoying the sound of the word and the reaction it was getting from the adults. I looked at Callista over their heads and saw tears streaming down her face. Happy tears, I thought. Hopeful tears. Thank you, I mouthed silently. She shook her head. You earned it, had I? 6 weeks of diaper changes and bedtime stories felt inadequate compared to the 2 years she'd done it alone, but maybe that was the point. Maybe earning a place in my children's lives wasn't about grand gestures or making up for lost time. Maybe it was about showing up consistently, day after day, until one day at the zoo they decided I'd been around long enough to be called Dada. We continued through the zoo, the twins now enthusiastically pointing out every animal and announcing, "Look, Dada," with each new discovery. By the time we reached the gift shop, they'd probably said it 100 times, and I hadn't gotten tired of hearing it once. Kaya picked out a stuffed elephant naturally. Cray chose a toy car, because even at a zoo he was loyal to his interests. I bought them without question, plus a few extras, because apparently becoming a father meant losing all sense of restraint in gift shops. We stopped for ice cream on the way back to the car. A mistake in terms of sticky hands and melted vanilla on car seats, but worth it for the pure joy on their faces. Kaya got more ice cream on her face than in her mouth. Cray ate him with methodical efficiency, determined not to waste a single drop. The best, I agreed. Grant? She hesitated, then continued. I've been thinking about what comes next. After Denver, after we've settled Robert's estate and figured out all the legal stuff. My heart rate increased. This was the conversation we'd been avoiding, the question of whether our lives would continue to overlap or diverge once the immediate crisis had passed. "I've been thinking about it too," I admitted. "I need to go back to Boulder. My apartment, my freelance clients, the life I built there. I understand. But I was thinking, what if you came with us? Not to my apartment, obviously that's barely big enough for the three of us, but to Boulder. You could get your own place nearby. We could do this co-parenting thing properly, with both of us in the same city." Hope bloomed in my chest, dangerous and irresistible. "You want me to move to Boulder? I want my children to have their father around. I want them to know you, really know you, not just see you every other weekend or on scheduled holidays." She paused. "And maybe, I don't know, maybe I want to see if there's something still here, between us, or if there's something new we could build." It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even a promise to try, but it was a door opening, an invitation to possibility. "I would like that," I said carefully, "all of it. Moving to Boulder, being close to the twins, seeing what we could be." "We need rules," Callista said quickly. "Boundaries. We can't just jump back into a relationship and expect it to work. Too much has happened." "Agreed. We need to do this right. Therapy maybe, both individually and together." She looked surprised but pleased. "You do therapy?" "I do whatever it takes. I meant it completely. I failed you before because I didn't do the work to understand myself, to stand up to my mother, to be the partner you needed. I'm not making that mistake again." "Okay." She nodded slowly. "Okay, therapy, separate homes, focused co-parenting first, and then we see what else might be possible." "One step at a time," I said, echoing her words from the plane. "One step at a time," she agreed. That night, after the twins had finally crashed from their zoo adventure, Callista and I sat on the balcony of the Boulder house I'd rented. The Rocky Mountains were dark silhouettes against the sunset, massive and permanent in a way that made our human dramas feel appropriately small. "Tell me about your ideas," Callista said. "For what you'll do now that you're not going to run." "Mercer Industries." I'd been thinking about it for weeks, turning over possibilities in my mind during late-night diaper changes and early morning cartoons. "I want to start something new, maybe a venture capital firm focused on small businesses and startups, the kind of companies that can't get traditional bank loans. Use my connections and resources to actually help people instead of just making rich people richer." "That sounds like you," she said. "The real you, not the one your mother was trying to create. I'd probably be terrible at it at first." "Probably," she agreed with a smile. "But you'll learn. That's what you do. You figure things out." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of suburban Boulder. Finally, Callista spoke again. "I'm sorry I kept them from you. I know I had reasons, and I know your mother made it nearly impossible to do anything else. But I'm still sorry you missed those first 18 months. I'm sorry I gave you reasons to think you had to hide them." I looked at her directly. "I'm sorry I chose pride over love. I'm sorry I let my mother manipulate me. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to fight for us. We were both broken people making broken choices," she said gently. "But maybe we're less broken now. Maybe we're finally ready to build something real." I hope so. I did. With everything in me, I hoped so. 3 months later, I was settled in Boulder with a house 10 minutes from Callista's apartment. The twins had bedrooms in both places, their belongings split between 2 homes in the typical arrangement of CO parents everywhere. It wasn't perfect, but it was working. I'd started the venture capital firm with a former colleague who'd left Mercer Industries years ago for similar reasons, tired of the politics, hungry for work that mattered. We were still figuring it out, still learning, still making mistakes. But it was mine in a way the family business had never been. Callista and I were doing therapy, both individual and together. It was hard work, excavating old wounds and examining patterns that had led to our divorce. But it was good work, necessary work. We were learning to communicate, to trust, to slowly rebuild what had been broken. We weren't together, not officially, but we had dinner together most nights, trading off whose place was hosted. We went to the park together, to doctor's appointments together, to the terrible toddler gymnastics class Kaya had insisted on trying. We were building a friendship based on shared parenting and mutual respect, and underneath it all was the possibility of something more. Kaya had started calling me Dada regularly. Cray said it less often but with more intention, saving it for moments when he really needed me. Both of them had accepted my presence in their lives with the easy adaptability of children who are loved and secure. One Saturday afternoon, we were all at the park, me pushing Kaya on the swings while Callista helped Cray navigate the climbing structure. A man nearby commented to his wife, "Look at that family. They seem happy." His wife agreed. "The kids are adorable. They thought we were a unit, a family in the traditional sense, and maybe we were, just not in the way they assumed. We were something more complicated and more honest, two people who'd loved and lost and found each other again, choosing every day to build something new from the wreckage of what came before." That evening, after the twins were asleep at Callista's apartment, we sat on her couch with tea and the comfortable silence of people who'd spent enough time together that words weren't always necessary. "I have a question," Callista said finally. "Okay. Are you happy? Really happy, not just going through the motions?" I thought about it honestly. Was I happy? I'd given up $1 billion company, walked away from the legacy I'd been groomed for since birth, blown up my relationship with my mother potentially beyond repair. I was living in Boulder instead of Chicago, running a startup instead of an empire, changing diapers instead of changing markets. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with the certainty of it. "I'm happier than I've ever been. I'm doing work that matters. I have children who call me Dada. And I have you. Not in the way I want yet, maybe, but in my life again. So yes, I'm happy." "Good." She smiled. "Me too, yeah?" "Yeah, you've been present, Grant. Every single day for 3 months you've been there for them. You've done the work. You've been patient with me, with yourself, with the process. You've proven you're different. Does that mean?" "It means I'm ready to try." She turned to face me fully. "Really try. Not just co-parenting, but us, dating maybe. Seeing if what we had before can be rebuilt into something better. The hope that had been living quietly in my chest blazed into something bright and warm. I would really like that. We'll still go slow, still keep separate homes for now, still prioritize the twins above everything else. Absolutely. But maybe we could go on an actual date, like adults, without the kids, somewhere with cloth napkins and proper wine glasses. I would love nothing more. I grinned. I'll even make a reservation somewhere your father would have approved of. Her eyes filled with tears at the mention of Robert. He would have liked this, seeing you be there for us, seeing you do the work. I hope so. I made him a promise. You kept it. She reached for my hand, her fingers lacing through mine in that gesture that still felt both familiar and new. You're keeping it every day. We sat like that for a while, holding hands on her couch while our children slept in the next room and the future stretched out before us full of possibility and promise. Love isn't about grand gestures, it's about being present. It's about choosing your family over your pride. Grant learned the hardest way that real wealth isn't in bank accounts, it's in the people who call you Dada and the woman who gives you a second chance you don't deserve. If this story touched you, like this video, share it with someone who needs hope. Comment, what lesson hit you hardest? And subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories for more tales of redemption that'll restore your faith in second chances. Because sometimes the best journeys begin at 30,000 feet between who you were and who you're brave enough to become. 6 months after that conversation, Callista and I were officially together. Not married, that would come later, after more time and more healing, and a proposal that involved both twins and their enthusiastic, if slightly confused participation. But together, committed, building a life that looked nothing like what either of us had planned, but felt more right than anything we'd imagined. My mother never met Kaya and Cray. She sent birthday gifts through lawyers, expensive and impersonal. I sent thank you notes and returned the gifts, replacing them with books and toys chosen with actual knowledge of what my children liked. Eventually, the gifts stopped coming. Victoria Mercer had her company and her legacy. I had my family. On Kaya and Cray's second birthday, we threw a party at my house in Boulder. Just close friends and Callista's chosen family, the people who'd supported her through the hard times. The twins destroyed an expensive cake with enthusiasm and got frosting absolutely everywhere. It was chaos and perfect, and exactly what a birthday should be. After the guests left and the twins were finally mercifully asleep, Callista and I sat in my backyard, watching the stars come out over the mountains. "You know what I realized today?" she said. "What's that?" "We're happy. Really, genuinely happy. Not despite everything that happened, but maybe because of it. We had to break completely to build something real." She was right. If we'd stayed together during our first marriage, we would have eventually destroyed each other. I would have remained my mother's puppet, and Callista would have diminished herself trying to fit into a world that didn't want her. We'd needed to break, to grow separately, to become people capable of choosing each other for the right reasons. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" "For getting on that plane. For being brave enough to see your father even though you knew I might be there. For giving me a chance I hadn't earned yet. Thank you for showing up," she countered. "For standing up to your mother. For choosing us even when it cost you everything. It didn't cost me everything." I pulled her closer, her head resting on my shoulder in a gesture that had become natural over the months. It cost me things that never made me happy anyway, and it gave me everything that it does. We sat there in the darkness, two people who'd found each other and lost each other and found each other again. Two people who'd learned the hard way that love isn't about perfection or grand gestures or meeting other people's expectations. Love is about being present, about doing the work, about choosing every single day to build something real with someone who chooses you back. Inside the house, our children slept peacefully, unaware of the complicated journey that had brought their parents back together. They would grow up knowing they were loved, knowing their father was there for them, knowing that family wasn't about perfection, but about presence. And that, I thought as the stars came out one by one over the mountains, was the only legacy that mattered. Sometimes the best journeys begin at 30,000 feet, between who you were and who you're brave enough to become. Sometimes love gets a second chance. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and you do the work and you choose right, broken things heal into something stronger than they ever were whole. This was our second chance. And this time, we weren't going to waste it.